Last Thursdayism. You wake up in the morning, reach for your phone, and scroll through photos from last year. There you are, at a birthday party, smiling, cake everywhere, friends laughing. It feels solid, real. You clearly remember being there. But here is a strange question. How do you actually know that birthday party truly happened? Not how strongly you feel it happened, but how you know it did. You are not filming your life from the beginning of time. You are trusting memories, photos, and records. And today, that trust feels completely normal. But what if I told you there is a philosophical idea that calmly says all of this could have been created very recently, and you would never be able to tell the difference? Yes, even that embarrassing photo you wish you could delete. Most of us move through life assuming that the past is fixed and reliable. We assume yesterday led to today, and today will lead to tomorrow. We rely on memory, history books, scars on our knees, and old messages in our inbox. We rarely stop to question them, and honestly, why would we? Questioning whether the past exists sounds pointless, impractical, and maybe a little unhinged. We have exams to pass, bills to pay, and deadlines to meet. Thinking too deeply about the nature of time feels like something reserved for philosophers with too much coffee and not enough sleep. So we overlook it. We trust our memories because we have to. Life would fall apart otherwise. But this unquestioned trust hides something interesting. We assume that evidence of the past automatically means the past actually happened. Fossils mean dinosaurs walked the earth. Wrinkles mean years have passed. Memories mean experiences occurred. Yet all of these rely on one big assumption, that evidence always comes from real past events. We rarely ask whether it could be otherwise. And this is where things start to get weird in a strangely calm and logical way. This brings us to a thought experiment known as Last Thursdayism. Despite the playful name, the idea itself is deeply unsettling. Last Thursdayism suggests that the entire universe could have been created last Thursday. Not just the Earth, but everything. The stars, the light traveling from them, your memories, your photos, your documents, your childhood stories, and every history book ever written. According to this idea, the universe was created in a fully formed state, complete with built-in evidence of a long past, even though that past never actually happened. Under Last Thursdayism, your memory of learning how to ride a bike did not come from falling and scraping your knees as a kid. It was simply placed into your mind when the universe was created. That old photo of you holding a tiny bicycle helmet was created alongside the memory. The dent in the helmet was created too. Everything lines up perfectly. That is the unsettling part. There is no obvious flaw, no missing puzzle piece. Everything looks exactly the way it should if the universe were billions of years old. Now, before this starts sounding like a conspiracy theory, it is important to understand what Last Thursdayism is really doing. It is not trying to convince you that the universe actually was created last Thursday. Instead, it is exposing a limitation in how we know things. It highlights the fact that we can never directly observe the past. We only observe the present and make inferences. Memories are experiences happening now. Records are objects existing now. Even light from distant galaxies is something reaching us now. The past itself is never directly accessible. This matters because it challenges a deep assumption about knowledge, We often think that if something cannot be proven false, it might still be possible. And technically, last Thursdayism cannot be disproven. Any evidence you bring up can be explained as part of the initial creation. Dinosaur bones, ancient ruins, family traditions, all of it fits perfectly into the story. That makes the idea frustrating, but also powerful. It forces us to ask what counts as a good explanation. In daily life, this question shows up more than you might expect. Think about trust. If a friend tells you a story about something that happened years ago, you believe them based on consistency, detail, and past reliability. But you never truly know. Think about history. We trust historians not because they can time travel, but because their explanations fit together well and help us predict future discoveries. Science works the same way. We trust theories not because they are untouchable, but because they explain many things with fewer assumptions and help us understand what comes next. Last Thursdayism fails at this practical test. It explains everything by adding an enormous assumption that the entire universe was created recently with fake memories and evidence. It does not help us predict anything new. It does not make life easier to understand or navigate. It just says everything is an illusion that perfectly mimics reality. Philosophers call this an unfalsifiable claim. It cannot be tested or disproven, which makes it interesting, but not useful. There is a famous example often discussed alongside this idea involving the philosopher Bertrand Russell. He once suggested that the world might have been created 5 minutes ago, complete with memories and records. You would feel just as confident that your entire life happened, even though under this idea it did not. Russell was not promoting this belief. He was pointing out how strange knowledge can be when taken to extremes. Just because something is logically possible does not mean it deserves serious belief. This idea also connects to something called Occam's razor, which is a principle that says when two explanations explain the same thing equally well, the simpler one is usually better. Saying the universe is old and developed naturally requires fewer assumptions than saying it was created recently with a perfectly fabricated past. The simpler explanation wins, not because it feels nicer, but because it does more work with less baggage. So where does that leave us? Last Thursdayism does not tell you to stop trusting your memories or throw away history books. Instead, it gently reminds us that knowledge is built on assumptions we agree to live with. We trust the past not because it is logically unbreakable, but because it works. It helps us learn, plan, and make sense of our lives, and in the end, that might be the most human answer of all. Even if the universe did begin last Thursday, you still feel hunger, joy, curiosity, and love today. You still learn lessons. You still make choices. Meaning does not disappear just because certainty is imperfect. And maybe that is the quiet lesson hidden inside this strange idea. Life does not need absolute proof of the past to move forward. It only needs us to keep going, one very real present moment at a time. The experience machine. Think about the last time you were watching a show late at night and suddenly realized 3 episodes had passed without you noticing. You were comfortable, entertained, and completely absorbed. For a moment, nothing else mattered. No worries, no stress, no boredom. Just that feeling of being wrapped inside a perfect little bubble. Now here is the strange part. When the screen goes dark and reality comes back, there is sometimes this quiet feeling of emptiness. You had fun, but somehow it feels thin, like cotton candy that vanished the second you tasted it. A lot of us live our lives chasing moments like that. We scroll endlessly, binge shows, grind for likes, and daydream about a future where everything feels good all the time. We tell ourselves that if we could just feel happy enough, long enough, then life would finally be complete. Pain is bad, pleasure is good, and more pleasure must mean a better life. That idea feels obvious. It feels natural, and because it feels so obvious, most people never stop to question it. But here is where things get interesting. Even though we say we want happiness, people often reject shortcuts to happiness. We do not want fake friends, even if they treat us perfectly. We do not want fake achievements, even if they feel amazing. We want the real thing, even when the real thing is harder, messier, and sometimes painful. That contradiction is easy to miss, but once you see it, it is hard to unsee. This is where a famous philosophical thought experiment comes in, called the experience machine. It was proposed by the philosopher Robert Nozick. The idea is simple and unsettling. Suppose there exists a machine so advanced that it can give you any experience you want. Total happiness, total fulfillment. You could feel like you wrote the greatest novel ever, fell deeply in love, saved lives, or lived a life full of meaning and success. Once you plug in, you would not know it is fake. Every emotion would feel completely real. You can choose your perfect life, plug into the machine, and stay there forever. No suffering, no boredom. Just exactly what you want, all the time. The big question is this: would you plug in? At first, many people say yes. Why not? If happiness is all that matters, then this machine seems like the ultimate solution. But then something strange happens. When people really think about it, a lot of them change their minds. They hesitate. They feel uneasy. Even though the experiences would feel real, something about living inside a machine feels wrong. That reaction tells us something important about what we value. The experience machine matters because it forces us to ask a deep question about what makes life good. Is a good life just about how things feel on the inside, or does it also matter what is actually happening in the real world? Is happiness enough, or do truth, effort, and authenticity matter too? Think about your own life for a moment. Imagine telling people you are a great musician, but knowing deep down you never learned an instrument. The feeling of success might be there, but would it really satisfy you? Or imagine being told you are loved by many people, but later discovering they were all programmed to act that way. Even if the emotions felt real at the time, many of us would feel cheated. This idea shows up everywhere in modern life. Social media is a small taste of the experience machine. A perfectly edited photo can make life look amazing, even when it is not. Likes and comments can feel validating, but they do not always reflect genuine connection. Video games let us feel powerful and accomplished, but eventually the screen turns off. These experiences are not bad, but they raise the same question. Are we okay with experiences alone, or do we want them to be grounded in reality? Nozick argued that we care about more than just our inner feelings. We want to actually do things, not just feel like we did them. We want to be certain kinds of people, not just have the experience of being them. We want to live in contact with reality, even when reality hurts. There is also something deeply human about struggle. Earning something gives it weight. Learning from failure shapes who we become. If everything good came effortlessly from a machine, it would strip life of growth, responsibility, and meaning. Pleasure without effort can feel empty, like winning a game where the rules were rigged in your favor. A helpful way to think about this is relationships. You might be able to simulate the feeling of being loved perfectly, but real relationships involve misunderstandings, compromises, and vulnerability. Those uncomfortable parts are not bugs. They are features. They are what make love real and meaningful. The experience machine also explains why people choose difficult paths, why someone trains for years to master a skill instead of just pretending to be skilled, why people want to raise real children instead of virtual ones, why truth matters, even when lies would feel better. Deep down, many of us believe that a meaningful life requires more than pleasant feelings. It requires contact with reality and ownership of our actions. This thought experiment has been discussed for decades because it hits a nerve. It challenges the idea that happiness is the only goal. It suggests that meaning, authenticity, and truth might matter just as much, if not more. And it explains why a life full of comfort can still feel hollow if it lacks purpose. So the next time you find yourself chasing the next distraction or fantasizing about a perfect, painless life, pause for a second. Ask yourself what you really want. Is it just to feel good, or is it to live something real? The experience machine does not give us an easy answer, but it gives us a powerful mirror. And sometimes, the most important questions are the ones that make us uncomfortable. In a world full of endless entertainment, artificial highs, and carefully curated realities, this idea feels more relevant than ever. We are not just experience seekers, we are meaning seekers, and that might be the most human thing about us. The Great Filter. You know that feeling when you open your phone just to check one notification, and suddenly it is an hour later, and you are deep into videos you never planned to watch. Time disappears quietly, without warning. You did not feel a dramatic moment where things went wrong. It just happened. Now here is a strange thought. What if the universe works the same way? What if entire civilizations quietly disappear without a big explosion or a movie-worthy disaster, and no one else ever notices? That unsettling idea is where today's topic begins. Most of us grow up assuming that if life managed to appear on Earth, then life should be everywhere. After all, there are billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, many of them with planets. We casually say things like, "Surely we are not alone," or "It is statistically impossible that we are special." It feels comforting. It feels logical. But at the same time, when we look out into space with powerful telescopes, we hear nothing. No signals, no clear signs. Just silence. And that silence is strange enough to bother scientists, philosophers, and curious people alike. The common mindset is to assume that progress is automatic, that once life starts, it naturally becomes smarter, more advanced, more powerful, and eventually spreads across the stars. We apply our human experience to the cosmos. We look at our own history and think, we survived wars, plagues, and disasters, so surely intelligent life elsewhere would do the same. But this way of thinking hides a dangerous assumption. It assumes survival is guaranteed, and it rarely is. This is where the idea known as the Great Filter comes in. The Great Filter is a way of explaining why the universe looks so empty despite being so big. In simple terms, it suggests that there is some kind of extremely difficult barrier that almost all life fails to pass. This barrier filters out civilizations before they become advanced enough to explore space or communicate across the stars. Only a tiny number ever make it through. Maybe only one. Maybe us. Think of it like a massive obstacle course. Life starts at the beginning, as simple cells. Then it has to pass several checkpoints, becoming complex life, developing intelligence, creating technology, avoiding self-destruction. Each step looks small on its own, but the odds of passing all of them are incredibly low. Somewhere along this path, most life gets stuck or wiped out. That obstacle is the great filter. What makes this idea especially uncomfortable is that we do not know where the filter is. It could be behind us, or it could be ahead of us. If it is behind us, that means we already passed the hardest part. Maybe the jump from simple life to complex life is nearly impossible. Maybe the formation of intelligent beings is unbelievably rare. If that is true, then we are incredibly lucky. Cosmic lottery winners. But if the great filter is ahead of us, then things get darker. That would mean many civilizations reach a level similar to ours, with advanced technology and global power, and then something goes terribly wrong. They collapse. They destroy themselves. They fail to manage the tools they created. And if that keeps happening again and again across the universe, it would explain the silence we see today. This matters far beyond space and science fiction. The great filter forces us to look at ourselves differently. It turns our everyday choices into something much bigger. How we treat our planet, how we handle powerful technologies, how we deal with conflict. These are no longer just political or environmental issues. They might be survival tests that determine whether humanity becomes a long-lasting civilization or just another quiet failure in the universe. You can see hints of this idea in real life already. Think about how quickly technology grows compared to wisdom. We can create tools that reshape the world, but our ability to cooperate, slow down, and think long-term often struggles to keep up. Nuclear weapons, environmental damage, and uncontrolled artificial intelligence are often mentioned as possible future filters, not because they are guaranteed to destroy us, but because they demand maturity at a level we have never needed before. A famous way of illustrating this comes from the Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi. During a casual lunch conversation, he asked a simple question. If the universe is so big and old, where is everybody? That question still echoes today. The great filter is one of the most chilling answers we have. It says they were there once. They just did not make it. There is also a powerful emotional side to this idea. If the great filter is behind us, then human life is unimaginably precious. Every culture, every language, every person represents something the universe almost never produces. We are not just passengers on a random planet. We are survivors of impossible odds. That realization can inspire gratitude, humility, and responsibility. If the filter is ahead of us, then awareness becomes our greatest advantage. Unlike hypothetical alien civilizations, we can actually talk about this risk. We can reflect. We can choose caution over recklessness. In that sense, simply understanding the great filter could be part of how we avoid it. There is no single experiment that proves the great filter exists. It is not a discovery you can hold in your hands. It is a pattern, a question born from silence, a reminder that survival is not automatic, even on a cosmic scale. And maybe that is the most important lesson of all. When you step back and think about it, the great filter quietly reframes human life. It suggests that progress is not guaranteed, intelligence does not equal wisdom, and existence itself is fragile. Whether the filter is behind us or ahead of us, the message is the same. Being here is rare. Staying here takes effort. So the next time you look up at the night sky and feel small, remember this: you are part of a story that almost never gets told. A story where the universe tried countless times, and somehow, against all odds, we are still here. The question is not just whether we are alone. The real question is whether we will be careful enough to remain. The hard problem of consciousness. Have you ever stared at your phone after waking up, scrolling through messages, half asleep, and suddenly felt a strange sense of being you again? Not just awake, but present. Your eyes see the screen, your fingers move, but there is also this quiet inner feeling that says, I am here. That feeling does not come with an instruction manual, it just appears. And the weird part is that no matter how advanced our phones, computers, or machines become, none of them seem to have that feeling. They process, calculate, respond, and even talk back, but they do not wake up one day and feel like themselves. That tiny everyday moment opens the door to one of the biggest mysteries humans have ever faced. Most of us go through life without questioning this at all. We feel emotions, we taste food, we feel pain, joy, boredom, and excitement, and we assume that this is just how brains work. We know that the brain is made of cells, electricity, and chemicals, so we often think that consciousness is simply the brain doing its job. When scientists talk about neurons firing or signals moving through the brain, it feels satisfying. It feels like the mystery is solved. But if you slow down and really think about it, there is something deeply puzzling hiding under that explanation. We understand how the brain processes information, but we do not understand why those processes feel like something from the inside. This is where people usually get confused or uncomfortable. Many assume that consciousness is just intelligence, memory, or attention. Others think it is some mystical soul or spiritual spark. Some avoid the topic altogether because it feels too abstract or too philosophical to matter in everyday life. But the truth is that consciousness is the most personal thing you will ever experience. It is the reason pain hurts, music moves you, and colors feel vivid instead of empty data. Ignoring it is easy, but understanding it could change how we think about ourselves, other people, animals, and even machines. This brings us to what philosophers and scientists call the hard problem of consciousness. The name sounds intimidating, but the idea is actually simple. The hard problem asks why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. In other words, why does brain activity feel like something instead of nothing? We can explain how your eyes detect light, how your brain identifies the color red, and how your mouth says the word apple. That part is considered the easy problems of consciousness, not because they're easy to solve, but because they deal with functions and behaviors. The hard problem is different. It asks why seeing red feels like red, why pain feels painful, why being you feels like anything at all. Think of it this way. Imagine a robot that is built perfectly to act like a human. It laughs at jokes, avoids danger, recognizes faces, and answers questions just like you do. From the outside, it looks conscious. But is there anything happening inside? Is there an inner movie playing? Is there a feeling of experience? Or is it all just mechanical reactions? The hard problem is about that inner movie. It is about the difference between doing something and experiencing something. This matters more than it might seem. Consciousness shapes how we treat others. If a being can feel pain, we believe it deserves moral consideration. This affects how we think about animals, medical patients in comas, and even future artificial intelligence. It also affects mental health. Depression, anxiety, and joy are not just brain states. They are lived experiences. Understanding consciousness could lead to better treatments, deeper empathy, and a clearer picture of what it means to be human. The hard problem also challenges our confidence in science. Science is incredibly powerful at explaining the physical world, but consciousness does not fit neatly into equations or measurements. You can measure brain activity, but you cannot directly measure what red looks like to someone else. You can describe the taste of coffee using chemistry, but that description will never fully capture the experience of tasting it. This gap between objective explanation and subjective experience is the heart of the mystery. One famous thought experiment that helps explain this is known as Mary the Color Scientist. Mary is a brilliant scientist who knows everything there is to know about color vision. She understands wavelengths, brain activity, and visual processing perfectly. However, she has lived her entire life in a black and white room and has never seen color. One day, Mary leaves the room then and sees the color red for the first time. The question is simple. Did she learn something new? Most people feel that she did. She learned what red feels like, and that feeling was not captured by all the physical facts she already knew. This story highlights the hard problem. There seems to be something about experience that goes beyond physical description. Another way to see the problem is through everyday pain. When you touch something hot, signals travel from your skin to your brain. Science can trace every step of that process. But nowhere in those steps do you find the feeling of pain itself. Pain is not written in the neurons like a label. It appears as an experience. That experience is real, undeniable, and central to your life. Yet it resists being reduced to physical parts. Some thinkers believe the hard problem will eventually be solved by neuroscience. Others think it may require a new way of understanding reality itself. A few even argue that consciousness might be a fundamental part of the universe, like space or time. What is important is not which answer is correct, but that the question forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. At the end of the day, the hard problem of consciousness reminds us that being human is not just about functioning correctly. It is about experiencing the world from the inside. Every laugh, every memory, every quiet moment of awareness is part of that mystery. We may not have the answer yet, but asking the question brings us closer to appreciating how strange and extraordinary it is that there is something it is like to be you. The dark forest theory. Have you ever been in a group chat where no one wants to be the first to talk? Everyone is there. Everyone is online. You can see the little indicators popping up. But somehow the chat stays completely silent. You might think, why is no one saying anything? Someone could just start a conversation. But instead, everyone waits. Because the moment you speak, you reveal yourself, you draw attention. And attention is not always a good thing. Sometimes staying quiet feels safer than saying anything at all. This kind of behavior shows up everywhere in our lives. We walk down a dark street at night, and suddenly we become quieter. We keep our heads down. We avoid eye contact. Not because we are guilty or scared for no reason, but because we do not know who else is out there. We assume others might be friendly, but we cannot be sure, and when the cost of being wrong is high, silence starts to feel like the smartest option. this is something people often overlook. We like to think that curiosity and communication are always good. We are taught that reaching out, sharing and connecting will lead to progress. But deep down, we also know that sometimes being noticed can put you in danger. Now take that exact feeling and stretch it to the scale of the entire universe. This brings us to a fascinating and unsettling idea known as the dark forest theory. In simple terms, the dark forest theory says that the universe is quiet not because no one is out there, but because everyone is hiding. Picture the universe as a vast dark forest at night. Every civilization is like a hunter moving silently between the trees. Each one carries a weapon. Each one wants to survive. And none of them know the intentions of the others. In a forest like this, making noise is dangerous. If you reveal your location, you might attract a friend. Or you might attract something that will destroy you. The core idea is surprisingly simple. Every civilization wants to survive. Resources in the universe are limited, and no civilization can ever be completely sure that another civilization is peaceful. Even if one group seems friendly today, it could become hostile tomorrow. Or its technology could advance so quickly that it becomes a threat without even meaning to. Because of this uncertainty, the safest strategy is silence. Do not reveal your location. Do not send signals. Do not announce your existence. If you detect another civilization first, the safest move might even be to eliminate it before it has a chance to do the same to you. This idea matters because it completely flips the way we usually think about extraterrestrial life. For a long time, people have asked a famous question. If the universe is so big and so old, where is everyone? We have billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, many of them older than our own sun. Statistically, intelligent life should be common. Yet when we look into space, we hear nothing. No clear signals. No obvious visitors. Just silence. The dark forest theory suggests that this silence is not empty. It is cautious. It is intentional. And this idea does not only apply to space. You can see echoes of it in human behavior all the time. Think about countries with powerful weapons. Often, the most dangerous standoffs are the quiet ones. No announcements, no shouting, just careful observation and restrained movement. Or think about social media. Sometimes the loudest voices attract the most attention, but also the most attacks. Meanwhile, many people choose to observe quietly, never posting, never revealing their thoughts, because being visible can invite criticism or conflict. Silence becomes a form of protection. A famous story that helps illustrate this idea comes from science fiction, specifically from the novel The Dark Forest by Liu Cixin. In the story, humanity finally makes contact with an alien civilization. At first, this seems like a huge breakthrough, a moment of excitement and hope. But as the story unfolds, humans begin to realize something terrifying. By announcing our presence, we may have put a target on our planet. The universe is not a friendly gathering of curious neighbors. It is a survival game, and those who speak first might be the first to be wiped out. What makes this theory so powerful is how uncomfortable it feels. We want the universe to be friendly. We want first contact to be like a movie scene where aliens come with wisdom, peace, and glowing technology. But the dark forest theory asks us to consider a colder possibility. That intelligence does not automatically come with kindness. That survival pressures and shape behavior more than good intentions. And that silence, in many cases, is not ignorance, but wisdom. Interestingly, This theory also makes us rethink our own actions. Humans have been broadcasting signals into space for decades. Radio waves, messages, even golden records explaining who we are and where we live. From one perspective, this is beautiful. It is hopeful. It says we are curious and brave. From another perspective, it is like shouting your home address into a dark forest and hoping whoever hears it is friendly. We do not know who is listening, or if anyone is listening at all. In the end, the dark forest theory is not just about aliens. It is about fear, uncertainty, and survival. It is about what happens when you do not have enough information to trust others. It reminds us that silence can be strategic, that quiet does not mean empty, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is announce yourself too loudly. Whether in a group chat, a dark street, or the vast universe itself, the choice between speaking and staying silent can be a matter of survival. And that thought makes the quiet night sky feel a little less peaceful and a lot more watchful. Eternal recurrence. Have you ever had one of those days where everything feels like it is stuck on repeat? You wake up to the same alarm sound you have been hearing for years. You scroll through the same apps while brushing your teeth. You commute the same way, complain about the same things, and promise yourself that tomorrow you will finally change something. Then tomorrow comes, and somehow it looks suspiciously like yesterday. It can feel funny at first, almost like a joke, but after a while it starts to feel heavy. You begin to wonder if this is just how life works, like a loop that keeps playing whether you like it or not. Most people live with this strange relationship to repetition. We want comfort and routine, but we also crave meaning and progress. We tell ourselves that the boring parts are just temporary, and that the real life will start later. Later when we get the job. Later when we have more money. Later when things calm down. The problem is that later keeps moving. Days pass, then weeks, then years, and suddenly we are asking ourselves how we got here so fast. We rarely stop to question what it means to live the same patterns again and again. We are so focused on escaping repetition that we forget to ask whether our daily choices are even worth repeating. This is where a powerful and unsettling idea enters the picture, known as eternal recurrence. This concept is most famously associated with the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. At its core, eternal recurrence asks a simple but shocking question. What if you had to live your life over and over again, exactly as it is now for all eternity? Every joy, every mistake, every awkward conversation, every regret, every quiet moment alone. Not just once more, but infinitely many times. Nothing new added. Nothing taken away. Just this life on repeat. Forever. Now, it is important to understand that eternal recurrence is not just about time looping like a science fiction movie. Nietzsche was not mainly interested in whether this literally happens in the universe. Instead, he used it as a thought experiment, a mental test. The idea is meant to confront you with your own life. If a mysterious voice appeared and told you that this exact life would repeat endlessly, would you feel crushed, or would you feel strangely at peace? Your emotional reaction to that question says a lot about how you are living right now. This idea matters because it forces honesty. Most of us survive our days on autopilot. We tolerate things we hate because they feel familiar. We avoid risks because they feel scary. Eternal recurrence cuts through those excuses. If you knew that every small choice would echo forever, Would you still choose the same habits? Would you stay silent when you want to speak? Would you keep postponing your dreams? The idea pushes you to treat your life as something you would willingly sign up for again and again, not something you are just trying to get through. You can see this idea show up in everyday life more than you might expect. Think about how people often say things like, "I just need to get through this week," or "I just need to survive this semester." There is always a finish line somewhere in the distance. Eternal recurrence quietly challenges that mindset. It says, what if there is no finish line that magically makes everything worth it? What if meaning comes from how you live today, not from escaping today? That shift can be uncomfortable, but it can also be freeing. It puts the responsibility back in your hands. There is a famous passage where Nietzsche describes a demon visiting you in your loneliest moment and delivering this message of eternal repetition. He asks whether you would curse the demon or bless it as a divine messenger. This story is powerful because it removes abstraction. It makes the question personal. You do not get to answer it in theory. You answer it with your gut. Your reaction reveals whether you are living in alignment with your values or just drifting along because it is easier. You do not need to be a philosopher to feel the impact of this idea. Think about a simple example. Picture a person who hates their job but never leaves because it feels safe. Each morning feels like a countdown to the weekend. Now, apply eternal recurrence. If that same miserable Monday had to be lived forever, suddenly the cost of staying becomes very clear. On the other hand, imagine someone who spends their days learning, helping others, creating, or simply being present with people they love. The idea of reliving those moments might actually feel comforting. There is also a psychological angle to this. Studies in modern psychology show that people who find meaning in daily actions tend to be more resilient and satisfied with life. They do not rely solely on future rewards to feel okay. While Nietzsche was not running experiments, his insight lines up with this research surprisingly well. Eternal recurrence pushes you toward a life that feels internally justified, not one that depends on external milestones to finally make sense. The beauty of eternal recurrence is that it does not tell you what choices to make. It does not give rules or commandments. It simply hands you a mirror. It asks you to look at your life honestly and decide whether you would accept it if it repeated forever. That question can be terrifying, but it can also be motivating. You do not need to radically change everything overnight. Even small adjustments matter. Choosing to be a little more intentional today is choosing a life you would not dread repeating. In the end, eternal recurrence is less about infinity and more about responsibility. It reminds you that your time is not a rough draft. There is no rehearsal version of your life where mistakes do not count. Every moment you live is the moment you are defining as repeat-worthy or not. That realization can feel heavy, but it can also feel empowering. If this life were to repeat endlessly, the least you could do is shape it into something you would not mind living again. The Transcension Hypothesis. You know that feeling when you buy a brand new phone, and for the first few weeks it feels magical? Everything is fast, smooth, and exciting. Then, a year later, you notice it slowing down. The battery drains faster, the apps feel heavier, and suddenly the thing that once felt futuristic now feels a bit tired. Eventually you start thinking, maybe it is time to upgrade. Not because the phone is broken, but because it feels like it has reached its limit. Now here is the strange question. What if the same thing happens not just to phones, not just to technology, but to intelligence itself? What if advanced civilizations do not die out in explosions or wars, but instead quietly upgrade themselves out of the universe we can see? Most of us grow up with a very specific picture of advanced civilizations. We imagine giant cities on other planets, flying ships, glowing towers, and maybe aliens visiting Earth someday. We tend to assume that if intelligent life becomes advanced enough, it will expand outward, colonize space, and leave obvious signs everywhere. That is why people often ask, if the universe is so big, where is everybody? Why do we not see alien megastructures, signals, or visitors? This question has bothered scientists for decades, and it is known as the Fermi paradox. But here is the thing. This question assumes that advanced intelligence always wants to spread outward in ways we can detect. And that assumption might be completely wrong. This is where a fascinating idea comes in, called the Transcension Hypothesis. In simple terms, the Transcension Hypothesis suggests that advanced civilizations do not expand outward forever. Instead, as they become more intelligent and more technologically advanced, they turn inward. They move toward smaller scales, denser computation, and more efficient use of energy. Eventually, they transcend the physical universe in a way that makes them invisible to us. They do not disappear because they die. They disappear because they evolve beyond what we can observe. Think about how technology has already changed in your own lifetime. Computers used to fill entire rooms. Now they fit in your pocket. Data storage keeps getting smaller while holding more information. Processing power becomes more efficient, not bigger. The trend is not expansion. The trend is compression. More intelligence, less space. The Transcension Hypothesis takes this trend and applies it to entire civilizations. It suggests that truly advanced intelligence does not build massive empires across galaxies. Instead, it builds incredibly compact and powerful systems that operate at microscopic or even deeper levels of reality. This idea matters because it completely flips how we think about intelligence and progress. We often associate progress with more energy use, more territory, more visible impact. But in everyday life, we already know that efficiency often beats size. A quiet laptop can outperform an old, noisy machine that once dominated a whole building. In the same way, a civilization that learns how to think faster, simulate entire universes, or experience rich inner realities might have no reason to build giant structures in space. From the outside, it would look like nothing is there. But on the inside, it could be unimaginably advanced. In day-to-day terms, think about how people spend more time in digital spaces than physical ones. Social lives, games, work, learning, and even identity are increasingly internal and virtual. The more advanced the tools become, the less physical movement is required. You do not need to travel to meet someone. You do not need to own shelves of books to access knowledge. Everything moves inward. The Transcension Hypothesis suggests that civilizations follow this same path on a cosmic scale. Instead of spreading across stars, they dive into deeper layers of reality, possibly using black holes, quantum systems, or dimensions we do not yet understand. One real-world idea that connects strongly to this is the way physicists talk about computation limits. There is a concept known as the ultimate computer, which describes how much information and processing can theoretically exist in a given amount of space and energy. Black holes, strangely enough, turn out to be incredibly efficient at storing information. Some scientists have suggested that the most advanced form of computation might happen near or within black hole-like systems, If that is true, an advanced civilization might deliberately move toward these extreme environments, not away from them. From our perspective, that civilization would look like it vanished. In reality, it would have moved into a realm where our instruments cannot easily follow. There is also a historical analogy that helps make this feel more real. Long ago, humans thought power meant physical strength and land ownership. Over time, power shifted toward information, organization, and intelligence. Today, a small group with the right knowledge and tools can influence the world more than a massive army from the past. The trend has always been toward smarter, not bigger. The Transcension Hypothesis simply extends this pattern forward, far beyond our current level. What makes this idea especially interesting is that it offers a peaceful answer to a scary question. Many explanations for why we do not see alien civilizations involve disaster. Nuclear war, runaway technology, environmental collapse, or cosmic accidents. The Transcension Hypothesis suggests something far calmer. Civilizations succeed, they thrive, they just stop shouting into the universe because they no longer need to. They are busy exploring inner worlds that are richer than anything physical expansion could offer. This also challenges how we think about the future of humanity. If this hypothesis is even partly correct, then the ultimate goal of intelligence is not endless growth or domination, but understanding and experience. The future might not be about conquering galaxies, but about mastering reality at its deepest levels. The loud phase of a civilization might be brief, the quiet phase might be eternal. So the next time you look up at the stars and feel uneasy about the silence, consider this possibility. Maybe the universe is not empty. Maybe it is full of minds that have simply moved on. Not upward, not outward, but inward, like an old phone, replaced not by something bigger, but by something far more powerful, hidden, and refined. The Doomsday Argument. You know that awkward feeling when you walk into a movie theater late and the film is already halfway done. You sink into your seat, try to piece together the plot, and silently wonder, did I miss the best part? Or is the ending about to hit any second now? There is something oddly unsettling about not knowing where you are in the story. Are you early, right in the middle, or almost at the very end? That tiny moment of uncertainty is uncomfortable. But now take that feeling and stretch it across the entire history of humanity. That is where today's idea quietly sneaks in. Most of us go through life assuming that tomorrow will look roughly like today. People will be born, people will grow old, and the world will keep spinning the way it always has. We plan careers, relationships, and even retirement as if the human story is basically stable and predictable. When we think about the future of humanity, we often picture flying cars, space colonies, or a distant science fiction world thousands of years from now. What we rarely stop to consider is our position in the timeline itself. We almost never ask the strange question of where exactly we are in the story of humans as a whole. This is where the Doomsday Argument enters the conversation. Despite its dramatic name, it is not a prophecy, and it is not a crystal ball. It is a thought experiment, a way of reasoning about probability and perspective. At its core, the Doomsday Argument asks a simple but unsettling question. If you consider yourself a random human among all humans who will ever live, what does that say about how many humans are likely to come after you? To make this easy, forget math jargon and think in everyday terms. Picture a long line of people stretching from the first humans all the way to the very last humans who will ever exist. You are somewhere in that line, but you do not know where. If the line were incredibly long, with trillions of humans yet to be born, the odds of you being so close to the front would be surprisingly small. On the other hand, if the line is shorter, it suddenly makes a lot more sense that you would be standing roughly where you are right now. The argument suggests that since you find yourself alive relatively early in the total possible span of humanity, it might mean that humanity does not have an extremely long future ahead. Not guaranteed, not certain, just statistically less likely that we are at the beginning of an unimaginably long human story. This is not about predicting a specific disaster. It is about probabilities based on where we seem to be standing in line. Why does this matter? Because it quietly challenges one of our most comforting assumptions, the idea that the future is basically infinite, and that our current moment is just a tiny blip. The Doomsday Argument nudges us to consider that our time might be more fragile than we like to believe. It does not say humanity will end tomorrow. It says that assuming an endlessly long future without evidence might be an emotional bias rather than a logical conclusion. This way of thinking shows up in everyday life more than you might expect. Think about how you judge situations when you lack full information. If you walk into a classroom during a test and notice most students are already handing in their papers, you probably assume the exam is almost over. You would not assume you arrived extremely early and everyone else is somehow ahead of schedule. You make that judgment because being somewhere near the middle or end is more likely than being at an extreme beginning. The same reasoning applies to humanity. We look around and see billions of people who have already lived before us. We see advanced technology, global communication, and complex societies. The Doomsday Argument says that this context matters. It suggests that we should update our expectations about the future based on the fact that we are here now and not at some extremely early starting point. One famous way to explain this idea uses a simple story. Suppose you are randomly assigned a number when you enter a building. You receive the number 60,000. You are told that numbers are given out in order, starting from 1, but you are not told how many people will enter the building in total. Based only on your number, would you assume there will be millions of people after you? Probably not. You would reasonably guess that the total number is not astronomically larger than your position. Your number gives you information, even though it feels incomplete. That is exactly how the Doomsday Argument treats your birth position in human history. You are not given a badge with your number on it, but statistically speaking, you still have one, and that number carries information whether we like it or not. Of course, this idea makes many people uncomfortable, and for good reason. It feels pessimistic. It seems to clash with our hope in progress, innovation, and human resilience. Critics argue that humans are not randomly sampled, that future technologies could radically expand our population, or that our perspective is biased in ways we do not fully understand. And those criticisms are fair. The Doomsday Argument is not universally accepted, and it is not meant to shut down debate. What makes it powerful is not that it gives a final answer, but that it forces us to confront how we reason about the future. It reminds us that optimism alone is not evidence, and that being alive now is not a neutral fact. It is a data point. Whether we choose to take it seriously or not says a lot about how we balance hope with humility. there is also a strangely motivating side to this argument. If humanity's future is uncertain, then what we do now matters more, not less. Our choices about technology, environment, conflict, and cooperation suddenly carry extra weight. If we are closer to the end than we assume, then preserving and improving human life becomes an urgent responsibility rather than a distant concern. In the end, the Doomsday Argument is not about fear. It is about perspective. It asks us to step back and see ourselves not just as individuals living day to day, but as participants in a much larger story. A story with a beginning, a middle, and eventually an end. We do not know where the final chapter lies, but we know we are holding a page right now. And just like sitting in that movie theater, unsure how much is left, that uncertainty can be unsettling, but it can also make us pay closer attention, appreciate the moment more deeply, and think more carefully about how we want the story to continue. The Anthropic Principle. You wake up one morning, grab your phone, and before you even check your messages, you check the weather. It is sunny. Not too hot. Not too cold. You shrug and think, yeah, seems normal. You do not panic that the sun rose at exactly the right distance to keep you alive. You do not celebrate that gravity still works. You just go on with your day. And that right there is the funny part. You are surrounded by conditions so perfectly balanced that if even a tiny detail were different, you would not be here to complain about the weather at all. Yet most of the time, we barely notice. Humans are very good at taking things for granted. We assume the world is the way it is, because that is how it has always been for us. The air has oxygen. Water behaves nicely. The universe did not collapse 5 minutes ago. So we rarely ask the deeper question. Why does the universe look so perfectly suited for life like us? Or maybe the more uncomfortable question, is it actually suited for us? Or are we just seeing it that way because we are here to see it? This is where people often get confused. Some think it proves the universe was designed just for humans. Others think it is just luck, and many people never think about it at all. This brings us to a fascinating idea called the Anthropic Principle. Despite the fancy name, the core idea is surprisingly simple. The Anthropic Principle says that when we observe the universe, we should not be surprised that it looks compatible with our existence. After all, if it were not compatible, we would not be here to observe it in the first place. In other words, our observations are filtered by the fact that we exist. We only see conditions that allow observers like us to show up. Think of it like walking into a party. You look around and notice that everyone speaks your language. You might think, wow, what are the odds that I ended up at a party where everyone speaks exactly the same language as me? But then you realize something important. If nobody spoke your language, you probably would not be at that party at all. You would have left immediately and never walked in. Your presence already tells you something about the environment. The Anthropic Principle matters because it reminds us to be careful about how we interpret coincidences. We often look at how finely balanced the universe is and jump straight to big conclusions. We say things like, the universe must have been made for us, or the odds of this happening by chance are unbelievably small. While those reactions are understandable, the Anthropic Principle asks us to slow down. It says that some things look special, not because they were designed for us, but because only special conditions allow anyone to notice them. This idea shows up in everyday life more than you might expect. Suppose you win a raffle with 1 million tickets sold. You might think, What are the chances that I won? They were incredibly tiny. But from the perspective of someone who did win, someone had to. If nobody won, the raffle would not make sense. The fact that you are holding the winning ticket feels extraordinary, but it doesn't mean the raffle was rigged just for you. Your experience is shaped by the fact that you are the winner. In science, the Anthropic Principle becomes especially powerful when talking about the universe itself. Physicists have discovered that many constants of nature fall into very narrow ranges. If gravity were a little stronger or weaker, stars might never form properly. If the expansion of the universe were slightly different, everything might collapse too fast or spread out too quickly for galaxies to exist. When people first noticed this, it felt almost unsettling. It looked like the universe was walking a tightrope just to allow life. One famous story connected to this idea involves the physicist Brandon Carter, who formally introduced the term Anthropic Principle in the 1970s. He pointed out that our location in time and space is not random. We appear in a universe that is old enough for stars to form heavy elements, but not so old that all stars have burned out. We appear on a planet with stable conditions, orbiting a stable star. That might sound miraculous, but the Anthropic Principle reframes it. Of course, we find ourselves in such a place. Only in such places could beings like us evolve and ask these questions. A helpful analogy is fishing with a net. Imagine you use a net with large holes and catch only big fish. You might conclude that all fish in the ocean are big, but that conclusion ignores the filtering effect of your net. Small fish were never able to be caught in the first place. In the same way, our existence acts like a filter on what kinds of universes we can observe. We only ever see universes where observers are possible. This does not mean the Anthropic Principle answers everything. It does not tell us why the universe exists, or whether there are many universes or just one. What it does is protect us from bad reasoning. It reminds us not to confuse selection effects with purpose. It helps scientists avoid drawing conclusions that sound deep, but are actually just consequences of our own presence. Interestingly, the Anthropic Principle also has two flavors that people often talk about informally. One is a modest version that simply says observations are conditioned on the observer existing. Most scientists are comfortable with this. The other is a stronger interpretation that suggests the universe must have properties that allow life to develop. This stronger version is more controversial and often gets mixed into philosophical or even religious discussions. But at its core, the principle itself is not mystical. It is a reminder about perspective. Once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere. You are alive to notice that Earth is comfortable. You are conscious to notice that the laws of physics allow complexity. You are here to ask why things worked out, which already tells you that in some sense they had to. The Anthropic Principle does not remove the wonder of existence. If anything, it sharpens it. It tells us that while our existence might not be guaranteed, it is also not as shocking as it first appears. So the next time you look at the stars and feel amazed that the universe seems perfectly tuned for life, remember this idea. The universe does not have to be friendly everywhere. It only has to be friendly somewhere. And if you are here thinking about it, then you already know you're standing in one of those rare, special places where thinking is possible at all. Information realism. You wake up, grab your phone, and scroll. A notification says a celebrity just broke the internet. Another post claims a miracle diet will change your life in 1 week. Someone else swears the world is secretly run by hidden codes and messages. You laugh, you doubt, you keep scrolling. But here is the strange part. Even when you do not believe everything you see, those words still affect you. Your mood shifts, your curiosity sparks. Maybe you even repeat one of those claims later in the day. Nothing physical changed around you, yet something real happened inside your mind. This is something we all do without thinking about it. We treat information like it is just noise, just content, just words on a screen. We assume that only physical things are truly real. Chairs are real, trees are real, phones are real. Information feels secondary, like a shadow of reality, rather than reality itself. Because of that, we often underestimate how powerful information actually is. We say things like it is just a rumor, or it is just data, or it is just an idea. But then we act as if those ideas shape our decisions, fears, hopes, and even our identity. Think about how people argue online. Many arguments are not about physical harm or direct actions. They are about narratives, beliefs, stories, and interpretations. Entire friendships end over words. Entire movements begin with a single message. Markets crash because of expectations. Panic spreads because of a headline. Hope spreads because of a story. We live in a world where information moves faster than anything else, yet we still talk about it as if it is less real than matter. This is where a philosophical idea called information realism comes in. At its core, information realism says that information is not just something we use to describe reality. Information is itself a real part of reality, not metaphorically real, not kind of real. Actually real in the same fundamental sense that physical objects are real. According to this view, information does not depend on human minds to exist. It is not just something we invent. It exists whether or not anyone is watching it, reading it, or understanding it. To make this simpler, think of information as patterns. A pattern can exist even if no one notices it. The arrangement of stars forms patterns long before humans named constellations. The sequence of genetic instructions inside a cell existed before anyone discovered it. Information realism says those patterns are not just descriptions we add later. They are part of what the world is made of. Reality is not just stuff. Reality is structured stuff, and that structure is information. Why does this matter? Because once you accept that information is real, a lot of things suddenly make more sense. For example, consider money. A paper bill is just paper. A digital bank account is not even physical at all. Yet money clearly has real effects. It can buy food. It can cause stress. It can create opportunity or inequality. What gives it that power is not the paper or the screen. It is the information that everyone agrees on. The value, the ownership, the rules. That information shapes behavior in very real ways. Or think about laws. A law is not a physical object. You cannot touch justice or measure fairness with a ruler. Yet laws change how millions of people live their lives. They decide what is allowed, what is punished, and what is protected. From an information realism perspective, laws are real because the information they contain structures society. The reality we experience is partly built from those informational rules. This idea also helps explain why misinformation is so dangerous. If information were just noise, false information would not matter much. But false information can start wars, ruin reputations, and cost lives. A single false report can cause panic. A single misleading post can influence elections. That only makes sense if information itself has causal power, Information realism takes that seriously. It says information does things. It changes the state of the world. There is also a deeper angle here that connects to science and technology. Modern physics already hints that information is fundamental. In black hole research, scientists talk about information being conserved. In computing, everything boils down to bits of information. In biology, life is guided by instructions encoded in molecules. The more science advances, the more it looks like reality is not just made of particles, but of relationships, structures, and rules. In other words, information. A famous illustration of this comes from the discovery of the genetic code. Long before humans knew anything about DNA, living cells were already following instructions. Those instructions told cells how to grow, repair themselves, and reproduce. The information was there even without observers. When scientists finally uncovered it, they did not create the code. They revealed it. This fits perfectly with information realism. The information was already real. Humans just learned how to read it. Another powerful example comes from the digital world. Think about a video game. Inside the computer, there are no castles, characters, or worlds in the physical sense. There are only electrical states and code. Yet within the game, real events happen. Players win, lose, cooperate, and compete. Emotions are felt. Time is spent. Achievements matter. All of that emerges from information structures. The game world is real in its own way because the information defining it is real and consistent. Now bring that idea back to everyday life. Your identity is partly informational. Your name, memories, beliefs, and values are patterns of information. Losing a memory can feel like losing a part of yourself. Gaining new knowledge can change who you are. That would be strange if information were not real. But if information is a fundamental part of reality, then it makes sense that changes in information feel like changes in being. Information. Realism also challenges the idea that only what you can touch matters. It invites you to take ideas seriously. It encourages responsibility in how information is created and shared. Words are not harmless. Stories are not neutral. Data is not just numbers floating in space. They all participate in shaping reality. So the next time you scroll through your phone, pause for a moment. Those posts are not just pixels. They are pieces of reality interacting with your mind. Some will inform you, some will mislead you, some will inspire you, and some will try to manipulate you. Understanding information. Realism gives you a better lens to see what is actually happening. You are not just consuming content. You are engaging with one of the most powerful ingredients of the universe itself. Terror management theory. You are standing in line at a coffee shop. The person in front of you orders the exact same drink they always do. The barista smiles like this moment has happened 1,000 times. Someone behind you is scrolling through social media, liking photos of vacations, gym selfies, and inspirational quotes about living your best life. It feels normal, boring even. But here is the strange part. Every single person in that line knows, at least somewhere deep down, that one day they will die. And yet nobody is talking about it. Nobody is acting like it. Everyone is just trying to get their coffee and move on with their day. That quiet contradiction is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior, and most of us never notice it. People go to great lengths to stay busy, stay distracted, and stay convinced that what they are doing really matters. We chase grades, money, relationships, status, followers, beliefs, and identities. We defend our opinions fiercely, sometimes even aggressively. We feel uncomfortable when someone questions our worldview. We feel proud when we belong to a group, and anxious when we feel left out. Most of the time, we explain these behaviors with simple reasons. We say it is ambition, culture, personality, or upbringing. But there is a deeper reason underneath all of this that many people overlook, and it has everything to do with our awareness of death. Humans are unique in one very uncomfortable way. We are smart enough to know that death is inevitable. We do not just react to danger like animals do. We can sit quietly and think about the fact that one day we will stop existing. Our bodies will fail, our stories will end, and the world will keep going without us. That realization has the potential to completely paralyze us with fear. If we truly sat with that thought all the time, daily life would be almost impossible. So the human mind had to find a way to cope. This is where terror management theory comes in. Despite the scary name, the idea is actually very simple. Terror management theory says that much of human behavior is driven by an unconscious need to manage the fear of death. The terror here is not panic, screaming terror. It's a quiet background anxiety that comes from knowing life is temporary. To manage that fear, we cling to things that make us feel meaningful, valuable, and like we are part of something bigger than ourselves. One of the main ways we do this is through what psychologists call cultural worldviews. These are shared beliefs about how the world works, what is right and wrong, and what gives life meaning. Religion, nationality, political ideology, career success, family values, and even personal achievements can all serve this role. When we believe in something that tells us we matter, that our life has purpose, and that we are living the right way, it acts like a psychological shield against the fear of death. Another key part of this theory is self-esteem. According to terror management theory, self-esteem is not just about feeling good about yourself. It is about feeling like you are living up to the standards of your worldview. When you feel like you are a good student, a good parent, a loyal citizen, a faithful believer, or a successful professional, your self-worth goes up. And when your self-worth goes up, the fear of death gets quieter. Not gone, but quieter. This matters because it explains a lot of everyday behavior in a new way. Think about why people get so defensive during arguments about religion or politics. It is not just about opinions. When someone challenges your worldview, it feels like they are threatening the very thing that protects you from existential fear. That is why these conversations can get emotional so fast. On some level, it feels like a threat to your sense of meaning and safety. You can also see this in how people react to reminders of death. News stories about disasters, pandemics, or violence often lead people to cling more tightly to their beliefs and groups. Some become more nationalistic. Some become more religious. Some double down on their values and reject outsiders even more strongly. It is not always rational, but it is very human. There is a famous set of experiments that helped support this idea. In these studies, participants were subtly reminded of their own mortality. For example, they might be asked to write a short paragraph about what they think will happen when they die. After that, researchers observed changes in behavior. People became more supportive of those who shared their beliefs and more hostile toward those who challenged them. Judges gave harsher punishments to people who violated moral rules. Participants showed stronger loyalty to their cultural groups. All of this happened without the participants realizing why they felt that way. What makes this even more fascinating is that the reminders did not have to be dramatic. Sometimes just walking past a cemetery or seeing a funeral home sign was enough to trigger these effects. The fear itself stayed unconscious, but the behavior changed. You can see terror management theory playing out in modern life all the time. Social media is a perfect example. Posting achievements, curating an identity, and seeking validation can act as a way to feel significant and remembered. Even arguments in comment sections can be understood this way. When someone attacks your beliefs, it can feel deeply personal because those beliefs are tied to your sense of meaning. This theory does not mean that everything people do is fake or fear-driven. Love, creativity, curiosity, and kindness are still very real, but it suggests that underneath many of our motivations is a basic need to feel like our lives matter in the face of impermanence. When we understand this, we can start to respond differently to ourselves and others. For example, instead of seeing someone as irrational or hateful, we might recognize that they are protecting their sense of meaning. Instead of feeling ashamed for wanting validation or success, we can see it as a natural human response to existential awareness. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain it. Terror management. Theory also invites a powerful personal question. If much of our anxiety comes from trying to avoid the reality of death, what would happen if we gently accepted it instead? Some research suggests that people who find meaning through growth, connection, and contribution rather than rigid beliefs may cope better with mortality awareness. And meaning comes from living fully rather than being right or superior. Fear loses some of its grip. In the end, terror management theory is not about being afraid. It is about understanding why humans care so deeply about meaning, identity, and belonging. It reminds us that beneath our arguments, ambitions, and defenses, we are all trying to do the same thing. We are trying to live a life that feels significant, even though it does not last forever. And there is something deeply human and even beautiful about that. The Big Rip. Have you ever noticed how old rubber bands feel fine at first? Then one day you stretch them just a little and snap. They break without warning. It always feels unfair because nothing dramatic happened. You did not pull that hard. You just trusted that things would keep holding together the way they always had. Now take that feeling and stretch it out to the entire universe. That sudden snap is the strange and slightly terrifying idea behind something called the Big Rip. Most of us live our lives assuming the universe is basically stable. The sky stays up, gravity works, atoms stay glued together, and tomorrow looks more or less like today. When people think about the end of the universe, they usually picture something dramatic, like everything collapsing into a giant fireball or slowly fading into darkness. What almost nobody thinks about is the idea that the universe might not quietly end or violently explode, but instead be slowly pulled apart like that old rubber band until nothing can stay together anymore. It feels counterintuitive, so we tend to ignore it or assume it is science fiction. This is where the Big Rip comes in. In simplest terms, the Big Rip is a possible future where the expansion of the universe keeps speeding up so much that it eventually overpowers every force holding things together. Not just galaxies drifting apart, but stars being torn away from galaxies, planets ripped from stars, and eventually even atoms themselves being pulled apart. It is not an explosion. It is not a collapse. It is the universe stretching itself to death. To understand this, think about space not as empty nothingness, but as a stretchy fabric. For a long time, scientists thought gravity would slow the expansion of the universe over time, like tossing a ball upward that eventually loses momentum. But then something surprising happened. When astronomers studied very distant exploding stars, they discovered that the universe is not slowing down, it is speeding up. Something is pushing space itself to expand faster and faster. We do not fully understand what this something is, so we gave it a name that sounds mysterious because it's dark energy. Dark energy matters because it changes how we think about the future of everything. If dark energy stays gentle, the universe might slowly drift into a cold, quiet ending. But if dark energy grows stronger over time, it could eventually overpower gravity, electromagnetism, and even the forces inside atoms. That is when the Big Rip scenario becomes possible. Space itself would stretch so aggressively that nothing could resist it. This sounds abstract, so let us bring it closer to home. Right now, gravity keeps you on Earth. Earth stays in orbit around the Sun. The Sun stays in the Milky Way galaxy. The galaxy stays bound together by gravity. In a Big Rip future, expansion would first pull galaxies apart from each other. You would not notice anything because it would happen far away over unimaginable timescales. Then gravity inside galaxies would lose the fight. Stars would drift away from their galactic homes. Later still, planetary systems would fall apart. Earth would no longer orbit the Sun. Finally, in the very last moments, the forces holding matter together would fail. Molecules would separate. Atoms would tear apart. Reality itself would lose its structure. Why does this matter to us now, sitting comfortably and worrying about daily life? It matters because it completely changes our sense of permanence. We like to think some things are unbreakable. Atoms, space, the laws of nature. The Big Rip reminds us that even the deepest rules of reality might have an expiration date. It also shows how little we truly understand about the universe. Dark energy makes up most of what exists, yet we barely know what it is. That is humbling in the best possible way. There is also something strangely human about this idea. We often think problems come from sudden disasters, but the Big Rip is about gradual change. Everything seems fine for a very long time, until suddenly it is not. That pattern shows up everywhere in life. Relationships drift apart. Small habits slowly reshape who we are. Systems break, not because of one big event, but because of steady pressure over time. The universe, it seems, might be no different. A powerful, real-world moment that brought this idea into serious discussion came from astronomers studying distant supernova explosions in the late 1990s. Two independent research teams were measuring how fast the universe was expanding, expecting to see it slowing down. Instead, they found the opposite. Expansion was accelerating. This discovery shocked the scientific community and eventually earned a Nobel Prize. It forced scientists to confront the reality that something unknown was driving the universe apart. From that single discovery, ideas like the Big Rip moved from wild speculation into legitimate scientific conversation. It is important to say this clearly. The Big Rip is not guaranteed. It is one possible future, not a prophecy. Dark energy might stay constant. It might weaken, or it might behave in ways we have not imagined yet. Science is honest about uncertainty. That is not a weakness, it is a strength. The Big Rip exists because scientists follow evidence wherever it leads, even when the destination is unsettling. There is also a comforting side to all of this. If the Big Rip were to happen, It would be unimaginably far in the future. So far away that humanity would have either evolved into something unrecognizable or disappeared entirely for unrelated reasons. This is not something to fear in a practical sense. It is something to think about, to reflect on, to feel awe toward. When you zoom out far enough, ideas like the Big Rip do not make life feel meaningless. They do the opposite. They make this moment precious. The fact that matter holds together at all is remarkable. The fact that stars burn steadily, that planets form, that life exists long enough to ask questions about the universe tearing itself apart is extraordinary. So the next time you stretch a rubber band, or notice how time quietly changes things without asking permission, remember that the universe might be doing the same thing on the largest scale imaginable, slowly, relentlessly, stretching space itself. And whether the Big Rip ever happens or not, the idea reminds us of something important. We are living in a universe that is active, dynamic, and still full of mysteries. And we are lucky enough to be here while it holds together. Laplace's demon. You have probably had one of those days where everything feels weirdly predictable. You wake up a little late, rush through breakfast, hit traffic at the same spot as always, and even the same song plays on the radio during the drive. At some point, you might laugh and say, wow, it is like the universe is on autopilot today. But then something unexpected happens, a message from an old friend, a sudden rain shower, a random thought that changes your mood. And just like that, the day feels unpredictable again. This tension between predictability and surprise sits quietly in the background of our lives, and it leads straight into one of the strangest ideas ever proposed in science and philosophy. Most of us live as if the future is partly open and partly fixed. We plan our days, set alarms, make schedules, and assume certain things will happen. At the same time, we believe there is room for choice, chance, and freedom. You decide what to eat, what to say, and which path to take, even though you know habits, rules, and circumstances influence you. We rarely stop to ask a deeper question behind all this. What if everything that will ever happen is already determined? What if the future is not just predictable in theory, but perfectly predictable in detail, down to your next thought? This is where the idea known as Laplace's demon enters the story. It comes from a French mathematician and scientist named Pierre-Simon Laplace. In the early 19th century, Laplace suggested a thought experiment that sounds simple at first, but becomes unsettling the more you think about it. He imagined a being, later called a demon, not because it is evil, but because it is super intelligent, that knows the exact position and motion of every single particle in the universe at one moment in time. Not most particles, not almost all, every single one. According to Laplace, if such a being existed and also knew all the laws of nature perfectly, it could calculate the entire past and the entire future of the universe. Every storm, every heartbeat, every conversation, every mistake, and every success would follow inevitably from the current state of the universe. Nothing would be uncertain. Nothing would be left to chance. The future would be as clear as the past. From this perspective, the universe would behave like an unimaginably complex clock, ticking forward in a perfectly determined way. Why does this idea matter at all? Because if Laplace's demon were real, then free will becomes deeply questionable. If your future actions could be predicted with perfect accuracy from the state of the universe long before you were born, then in what sense are you choosing anything? When you decide to study late at night, fall in love, change careers, or even watch this video, are you really making a choice, or are you simply playing out a script written by physics? This way of thinking fits neatly with how classical physics once viewed the world. In everyday life, we already rely on smaller versions of this idea. Engineers can predict how a bridge will respond to weight. Astronomers can predict eclipses years in advance. Meteorologists use current data to forecast the weather. The better the measurements and models, the better the predictions. Laplace simply pushed this logic to the extreme and said, if we had perfect information and perfect understanding, prediction would be absolute. There is a famous real-world example that shows how tempting this idea is. For centuries, scientists believed the motion of planets proved the universe was deterministic. Using the laws of motion and gravity, astronomers could predict where a planet would be far into the future with astonishing accuracy. This success created a powerful feeling that nature itself followed strict rules with no exceptions. If planets obeyed these rules, why not atoms, brains, and human decisions as well? But here is where things get interesting and a little uncomfortable. In the 20th century, physics uncovered something that shook this idea to its core. At very small scales, the universe does not behave like a perfectly predictable machine. In quantum physics, certain events cannot be predicted with certainty, even in principle. You can calculate probabilities, but not exact outcomes. This means that even with perfect knowledge, there are limits to what can be known about the future. This discovery does not automatically prove free will, but it does weaken the vision of Laplace's demon. If the universe contains genuine uncertainty at its foundation, then the dream of perfect prediction collapses. The demon loses its power, not because it is not smart enough, but because the universe itself does not provide all the information needed. Even beyond physics, Laplace's demon highlights something deeply human. We crave certainty. We want to know what will happen, how things will turn out, and whether our choices matter. At the same time, we value surprise, creativity, and freedom. A world where everything is already fixed can feel cold and suffocating, even if it is orderly. Think about relationships. If someone could predict every word you would ever say to your partner, every argument, every apology, every moment of affection, would love feel the same? Or think about personal growth. If your future failures and successes were already locked in place, would motivation still make sense? These questions show that Laplace's demon is not just a scientific idea. It is a mirror held up to our beliefs about meaning and responsibility. Today, most scientists agree that the universe is far more subtle than Laplace imagined. Chaos theory shows that even simple systems can become unpredictable because tiny differences grow over time. Quantum physics introduces uncertainty at a fundamental level, and human behavior is shaped by layers of biology, environment, culture, and reflection that resist clean equations. Yet Laplace's demon remains powerful because it forces us to ask the hardest questions. Are we passengers or participants? Is the future waiting to be discovered or actively created? The answer is not simple, and that is exactly why the idea still fascinates us. In the end, Laplace's demon teaches us something valuable, even if it is not real. It shows the limits of prediction, the complexity of nature, and the importance of humility when we try to understand the universe. It reminds us that knowledge is powerful, but never complete. And perhaps most importantly, it leaves room for wonder. Because a universe that cannot be fully predicted is a universe where curiosity, choice, and surprise still matter. The Library of Babel. Have you ever opened your phone, scrolled endlessly and thought, there is no way all of this information can possibly be useful? You see cooking videos next to conspiracy theories, life advice next to nonsense, and somewhere in between, a sentence that feels like it was written just for you. It is overwhelming, fascinating, and exhausting all at once. At some point, you might even wonder if meaning still exists when there is just so much content everywhere. That feeling of drowning in information is not new at all. In fact, someone imagined it long before the internet even existed. Most of us have a strange relationship with information. We love knowing things. We feel powerful when we learn something new. But at the same time, we are constantly overwhelmed by it. We save articles we never read, bookmark videos we never watch, and collect quotes that we forget the next day. We tell ourselves that somewhere out there is the perfect answer, the perfect book, the perfect explanation that will suddenly make everything clear. And yet, the more information we have, the harder it becomes to find what actually matters. We often overlook the idea that having infinite information does not automatically lead to understanding. This is where a fascinating idea called the Library of Babel comes in. It comes from a short story written by Jorge Luis Borges, a writer who loved playing with big ideas about knowledge, infinity, and meaning. The Library of Babel is not a real library you can visit, but a thought experiment. Borges describes a universe that is a massive library, made up of endless rooms filled with books. Every book has the same format, the same length, and the same symbols. The twist is that this library contains every possible book that could ever be written using those symbols. That means it includes books that tell the exact story of your life, books that predict the future perfectly, books that explain the meaning of existence, and also books that are complete nonsense with random letters that mean absolutely nothing. At first, this sounds incredible, a place where all knowledge exists. Every truth, every lie, every idea, every mistake, all sitting somewhere on a shelf. But here is the catch. Almost all of the books are meaningless. For every book that makes sense, there are countless others that look like pure gibberish. Strings of letters that have no words, no grammar, no message. Even the meaningful books are buried so deeply among the nonsense that finding them is almost impossible. The librarians in Borges' story spend their lives searching for meaning, hoping to stumble upon a book that explains everything, while knowing that the odds are overwhelmingly against them. Why does this idea matter? Because it mirrors our real world more closely than we might like to admit. Today we live in our own version of the Library of Babel. The internet contains an unimaginable amount of information. There are answers to almost any question you can think of, but also an endless supply of misinformation, half-truths, and noise. Just like the library, the problem is not a lack of knowledge. The problem is filtering it, knowing what matters, what is true, and what is worth your time. Think about how often you search for advice online. Maybe you look up how to be more productive, how to study better, or how to live a happier life. You find thousands of articles, videos, and opinions. Some contradict each other completely. Some are helpful. Some are misleading. The sheer volume makes it difficult to trust anything at all. In the Library of Babel, a book that tells the truth exists, but it is useless if you cannot find it. In our world, the same thing happens. Truth can exist, but it gets lost in the flood. Borges' story also explores something deeper, the emotional impact of living in such a place. Some librarians become obsessed, convinced that there must be a book that gives life meaning. Others fall into despair, believing that if everything already exists, then nothing truly matters. A few even worship certain books, thinking they are sacred, even when they might just be random nonsense. This reflects how humans react to uncertainty. When meaning feels hard to find, we either search desperately, give up entirely, or cling to whatever feels comforting. There is even a real-world project inspired by this idea. There is an online version of the Library of Babel that uses computers to generate pages of text. You can search for any sentence, and it will show you a page where that exact sentence exists, surrounded by random letters. Your name, your thoughts, even this script could already exist somewhere in that digital library. It is both thrilling and unsettling. On one hand, it feels magical. On the other, it reminds you that existence alone does not make something meaningful. Context does. The brilliance of the Library of Babel is that it forces us to rethink how we define knowledge and meaning. It suggests that meaning does not come from information itself, but from how we interpret it. A book filled with random letters is not meaningful until someone decides it is. A sentence only matters because a human mind understands it and cares about it. In a universe where everything exists, meaning becomes a human responsibility, not a built-in feature. So what can we take from this? The lesson is not that searching for knowledge is pointless. It is that discernment matters more than accumulation. Instead of trying to consume everything, we need to focus on what truly helps us grow, understand, and connect. The Library of Babel warns us that without filters, without critical thinking, and without intention, infinite information can lead to paralysis instead of wisdom. In the end, Borges was not predicting the internet, but he somehow described its soul, a place of endless possibility, endless confusion, and endless searching. The challenge is not whether the answers exist. The challenge is whether we know how to recognize them when we see them. And maybe the most powerful idea of all is this: meaning is not hidden in some distant book waiting to be found. It is something we create by choosing what we value, what we trust, and what we decide to carry forward in a world overflowing with words. The observer effect. You are alone in your room, scrolling through your phone, totally relaxed. Your posture is terrible, your face looks bored, and you are doing absolutely nothing impressive. Then suddenly you hear footsteps. Someone is about to walk in. Instantly your back straightens, your face changes. Maybe you pretend to be busy or productive. Nothing about the room changed, but you did. That tiny moment right there captures something strangely powerful about human behavior. The simple awareness of being watched can change what we do, how we act, and even how we think. Most of us like to believe that we are consistent people. We think our behavior comes from who we truly are on the inside. Hard-working stays hard-working. Honest stays honest. Focused stays focused. But if we are really being honest with ourselves, that is not how life works. People act differently when their boss is nearby. Students behave differently when the teacher is watching. Even athletes perform differently when a crowd is cheering or judging. We often overlook this because it feels uncomfortable to admit. We like the idea that our actions are purely our own, not shaped by who might be observing us. Yet deep down, we all know that being watched changes things. This idea has a name, and it is called the observer effect. In simple terms, The observer effect means that the act of observing something can change the thing being observed. It sounds almost poetic, but it is also very real. When someone knows they are being watched, measured, or evaluated, their behavior often shifts. Sometimes they perform better. Sometimes they become nervous and perform worse. And sometimes the change is so subtle that they do not even notice it happening. This effect shows up everywhere, from science labs to classrooms to everyday life. At first, the observer effect became famous in science, especially in physics. Scientists discovered that at very tiny scales, like particles smaller than atoms, the act of measuring something could actually disturb it. But here is the interesting part. You do not need to understand physics to understand the observer effect. You experience it constantly as a human being. Every time you adjust your behavior because someone is watching, you are living proof of it. Think about social media for a moment. When people know their photos will be seen, liked, or judged, they carefully choose what to post. They edit pictures. They rewrite captions. They present a version of themselves that feels safer or more impressive. That is not necessarily fake, but it is curated. The observer effect is working quietly in the background, shaping choices without asking permission. Even something simple as fitness tracking can trigger it. People who know their steps are being counted often walk more, not because they suddenly love walking, but because awareness creates pressure and motivation at the same time. The observer effect matters because it challenges how we think about truth and authenticity. Are people showing who they really are, or are they responding to being observed? In workplaces, employees might appear productive during evaluations, but relax once supervision fades. In schools, students might behave well during inspections, but revert later. This does not mean people are bad or dishonest. It means humans are responsive. Awareness changes behavior, often unconsciously. There is also a positive side to this. The observer effect can push people to improve. Knowing someone is watching can increase focus, effort, and discipline. Athletes train harder when coaches observe. Musicians practice more carefully when preparing for an audience. Even simple habits, like cleaning a shared space, improve when people know others will notice. Observation creates accountability. It nudges people towards their better selves, at least some of the time. One famous example of this comes from studies conducted in factories during the early 20th century. Researchers wanted to see how changes in working conditions affected productivity. They adjusted lighting, break times, and schedules. Surprisingly, productivity improved no matter what change was made. Even when conditions were made worse, workers still performed better. The reason was not the lighting or the breaks. It was the attention. Workers knew they were being observed, and that awareness alone changed how they worked. This became known as the Hawthorne effect, a specific example of the observer effect in action. Another powerful example shows up in medicine. Patients who know they are part of a study often report feeling better, even if they receive no real treatment. Simply being observed, checked on, and taken seriously can influence outcomes. The mind responds to attention in ways we still do not fully understand. Observation can become a kind of invisible force, shaping results without touching anything physically. The observer effect also raises an uncomfortable question. If observation changes behavior, then how much of what we see is natural? Cameras are everywhere now. Phones, security systems, online profiles. People are watched more than ever before. That constant awareness can lead to stress, performance anxiety, and the feeling of always being on display. At the same time, it can encourage kindness, responsibility, and effort. The effect itself is neutral. How it influences us depends on the situation and the pressure attached to being observed. Understanding the observer effect helps us become more self-aware. It allows us to ask better questions about our actions. Am I doing this because it matters to me, or because someone is watching? Am I avoiding this because no one will notice, or because it truly does not align with my values? These questions do not have easy answers, but asking them gives us more control over our choices. It also helps us understand others with more empathy. When someone changes behavior under pressure, it is not always dishonesty. Often, it is simply human nature responding to observation. We are social creatures. We care deeply about how we are seen, even when we pretend we do not. The observer effect reminds us that awareness itself is powerful. So the next time you catch yourself sitting up straighter when someone walks into the room, or working harder when your progress is being tracked, remember this: you are not strange, you are not weak, you are human. The simple act of being observed changes things, and once you understand that, you can start deciding when to let it influence you and when to step back and act on your own terms.